I got sued by the Department of Consumer Affairs literally like a year into owning that business. They came in, did a bunch of audits. They fined me like $70,000, which I then at 26 years old, I started fighting the Department of Consumer Affairs. So I remember like taking the train down to downtown Manhattan to go like meet with them, like unannounced, right? I just showed up and I was like, I need to talk to this guy. He's suing me, this guy right here. And they were like, oh, you can't just do that. And I was like, yeah, but is he here? And he was there and he came out and he spoke to me.
Hey everyone, this is Execute with Joe Leun, and that's me. This is a podcast where we talk about how you can stop floating towards your goals and start executing towards them. So really what we're going to be doing here is we have some guests come on, people who are getting stuff done, and regardless of what industry they're in. I'm in real estate, so we're definitely going to lean a little bit more towards real estate. And there's also going to be episodes where I'll just hop on here and let it rip for a few minutes about a particular topic. And really, again, the goal is to just help you get more done, accomplish whatever it is you want in your life, and not float. Right. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. He's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a while now. He's a sounding board for me. When I'm stressed out, I call him. He talks some sense into me. So today we have Naman. He's a real estate investor on Long Island. He's doing some wholesales, doing some flips on Long Island. Thanks for hopping on, Naman.
My pleasure, man. Always happy to chat with you, man. I didn't realize I was a sounding board for you. I'm gonna have to start sending you an invoice for all that work I'm doing. Damn.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, I call you once every couple of weeks when I'm stressed out, when Bilal and I are,
Yeah.
the sky's falling and we don't know what to do.
We got to start doing our weekly sales training again. That was exciting.
Yeah,
Helpful
yeah.
stuff.
So Naman and I actually, yeah, we used to get on a weekly call and just talk through sales specifically. Obviously, we're both real estate investors, so sales is a really great tool to get more deals, and not a lot of people in the industry really focus on that. It's kind of an overlooked thing. But Naman's, an adult, and he's got kids he's got to worry about, and I guess kids are more important than sales. You know.
That's true. And
So
I don't even like calling it sales. I like calling it just communications. That's really what it is.
yeah,
We
yeah.
get
I
on a
mean,
call and
sales.
we figure out how to properly communicate with our homeowners and, convey information and extract information. The only difference is that we're trying to transact at the end. So I guess that's why we would call it sales. But
Yeah, sales has a really bad connotation attached to it for I guess those pesky used car salesmen just scheming. Everyone thinks of like
yeah,
uh,
it's
you know
not a negative
s-
thing. It's just learning how to communicate with other people. That's all it really is. But language is important, and then everything that surrounds communication is important. So, with that said, we got to get back on our weekly sales calls.
yeah. Yeah, ultimately, I mean, sales. But Bilal and I were talking about this the other day. Is sales is really just like you said, communicating people's problems back to them and providing that solution. And that's really what the best salesmen are doing. They're not selling someone who doesn't need something. They're delivering them the exact product or service that they actually need, and that person walks away thrilled. You know.
Solving problems, solving the seller's problem, and that problem could be a physical problem. It could be in their mind, right? It could be in. We've seen this a million times. Embarrassed about the condition of the house, and they just want a very private, very quiet, quick sale. To a lot of people are going to be like, that's not a real problem. Just list it with the broker. But that's a very real problem. And if you think about in your life that the amount of times that something's happened to you and you were just mortified and embarrassed, right? I could think about when I was in school and like something happened and I would just be like, oh my God. And then so that those emotions are very powerful. And when they're
Yeah.
tied to your house, and let's say there's three generations of crap in your house, stuff in your house, you may not want to have an open house and have agents coming in and marketing your property out, and then having all the whole community come through, walking through your house. And so
Mhm.
problems can come in a lot of different shapes, sizes. It could be physical in the fact in the form of a leaky roof, or they just could be something mentally about how you feel about something. And most of the times when we're buying houses, they're they have to do with feelings, emotions, and how people are and what they want out of the transaction, just out of simplicity and convenience. And that's what I think we really do is we get to the heart of what those issues are, and then we
Mhm.
package that into a solution that revolves around the seller selling and us buying the house and getting everything that they ask for taken care of. Right.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, we've done training a lot, and
Hmm.
you and I are in the same boat where we think the emotion side of this is really one of the bigger factors for the seller's decision making, and most investors actually overlook that, right? Like the perfect example. I had a our virtual assistant. There was someone who's like, oh, she's like, why do you need to sell the house, right? And the guy's like, because my wife's leaving me,
Hmm.
and she's like, oh, okay, and how much were you looking to get for the house? Like no, like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, oh, that
Right.
that I can't imagine. How has it been? It's just like, how do you expect to build rapport with someone when
Right.
you hear their pain point and you don't acknowledge it, right? And you
Right.
don't ask them more questions about it. And again, be like a person about it. Be empathetic about it. Someone tells you something that they're going through, you know, appreciate the fact that they're being open and honest with you, and actually, explore that further. So
Yeah,
that,
I agree. I think, and that's where training comes into play, right?
yeah,
Because once you hear someone say something very private to you like that, your first instinct as we're raised is not to pry right into people's lives and things like that. That's their business type of thing. That's how we're raised. That's how it is in society. As so your first instinct when someone tells you something private is just to kind of move on, right? Like, oh, okay, because you feel like a little bit like, oh my God, why are you telling me this? Like, I'm
yeah,
not, I'm not a therapist or a divorce attorney. I can't help you one way or the other. So that's where training comes into play, where it's like, look for those cues, listen for those cues, and if someone says to you, "Hey, my wife's leaving me," like I've trained myself to be like, geez, well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. How you holding up? Right? Thank them for giving you this information, like, because it's not easy for someone to share that, and then follow it up with a how question, like, how are you holding up, or what's that feel like what's going on there, and you could do it in a way that doesn't sound invasive either. Like if I said, I appreciate you sharing that with you, how you holding up, it's just one human being concerned about another human. And
yeah.
I think also this kind of sales training goes is easier when you're just like a normal human being to begin with. Like if you're a sleazy, salesy type of guy or gal, like you're gonna come across that way. And if you're just like a normal person that just likes to communicate and is naturally like someone who likes to help people and communicate with people, I think then this sales process just becomes a lot easier for you because it's really just about, accentuating those natural inclinations that you have.
Obviously, you're investing on Long Island, super competitive market for those who don't know. Um,
Hmm.
and, you're providing for your family. You're, definitely successful. And that's why we want to have you on here. Now,
Well, I appreciate that.
I do want to take it back though to before all of this. Obviously I didn't know you back then. You're a senior in high school. What did that look like? What were you doing? What were you know who what kind of people were you hanging out with? What were you kind of what was your headspace back then?
So when I was a senior in high school, and this was a long time ago now, I graduated high school in like 2005 or something like that. I was taking the least amount of credits I possibly could. I was getting out of school at like 12 o'clock, right? Because I had all my credits were basically taken care of. I just had to take my, like, whatever I needed to take. So by
Yeah.
12, I was out of there. And I was one of those guys that was just like, I want to get into the real world. Like, I want to get out of here and I want to like go work and I want to make money. I hadn't quite understood like making money work for you, so I was still in that gear, which is like just go work and make money, like hustle and make money. So I had like senior year going into like first year of college, I was working like three jobs. So I would get out at
All
12,
right.
I would go to my first job. Then on the weekend, I would go to my weekend gig, which was at the movie theater. And then as soon as school was out, I took another job working at, it was in Limbrook somewhere. I was working, I was working for like this internet based, the company was selling like home not appliances, but like fixtures, tubs, lighting,
All
things
right.
like that for the home, but all internet based. And the guy, his dad had a business that was actually brick and mortar, and he was bringing it into the digital world, so in the internet. So it was actually a really interesting gig to be a part of. And so that's kind of what I was doing. I was just working, 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 trying to make money, stack. And then at the same time, one of my jobs was actually working at the local library at the
Oh no
time.
way.
So, and I wasn't a big reader before this, but I started reading, and I was always interested in business and money and that sort of thing. So I was like, all right, let me figure out, where all the business books are. So I looked it up and I realized like there was a whole section for business books. I think it was like 320 or something like that. So you go Dewey Decimal System, you go to 320, and then it was just like a rack full of business books: Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, all the greats as far as investments and stock market investing, also real estate. But I wasn't really that into real estate at the time. I was really into stock market wizards, right? So I read as many books as I could. I was like 17 years old when I first read my first book about Warren Buffett. It was called the Warren Buffett Way.
Mhm.
I think it was by Roger Lowenstein or something like that. And the reason why I got into it is some kid that I was working with. He was a couple years older than me. He was already in college, and we were having a conversation and we were changing the magazines, putting a new magazine in, and he was kind of like, hey, there was like a fortune magazine or something. It was like the richest people, and this guy Warren Buffett was on there, Bill Gates was on there, and I was like, who is this guy? I never even heard of him. And my buddy from college, his name is Anthony, shout out to Anthony, he was like, oh, Warren Buffett, yeah, we talked about him in class. This guy, like, he figured out how to make money because he was like, what's the one thing that people will always need? And he hit upon this idea that people are always going to need insurance. And so he bought up a bunch of insurance companies and started insurance companies, and now he's
Yeah.
one of the richest people in the world. So I mean, Warren Buffett's a lot more intricate than that, but that was just a conversation that I had with him. Like he's got a bunch of different diversified businesses, but that started
Yeah.
my journey really down the investment scene. And then I went to college. I went to Hofstra on Long Island, and I majored in
Hmm.
finance and economics and accounting. I did I had those as minors, and I had a concentration in finance. And then I got out and I got a job on Wall Street, and I started doing that, and that's where I spent the first probably 5 years of my professional career. Was at a bank called Credit Suisse.
So you're in high school, you're working three jobs,
Yeah.
but busting your ass. Now, were you partying much? Were you playing sports at all or any of that? Or were you really
Yeah,
just
I
like, I
was
want to get my money?
I wasn't on any teams, like formal teams, but I was always into sports. Probably my sport of choice to play is basketball. So I was always pretty athletic and playing sports, but never on an organized team. That's actually, I wish I did actually get on the teams. I think it would have been great for me, but never really did that. Partying here and there, but not like a huge partier. Not
Mhm.
like I wasn't like, you know, I dabbled here and there, and especially when I went to college, like we go out and do our thing. There was a lot of bars near Hofstra, but I didn't go away to school, so I didn't have that like crazy experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just a normal dude. I wasn't doing anything outrageous. I
Yeah.
was I was
Okay.
really more interested in the business side of things, business investments, and learning that and getting started in that field.
Yeah. So you get introduced to, Papa Warren, and you start realizing, like, hey, there's this guy out there that's doing this crazy stuff, making all this money in business. And so would you say that was like, uh, so Jocko Willink refers to this as the warpath.
Hmm.
You call it the path, whatever it is. I think there's always a time in someone's life where they maybe are just kind of floating, and then they really turn the corner and they realize, like, oh, that's what I want to do. And a lot of times it is when they see someone who's doing super cool things that they want to do. Now, would you say that was when you first went down the path, or not yet?
That's actually a really good question, man. So I think that was one of the moments. I've actually
Okay.
had several moments in my life where that happened, and you kind of like be like, oh, it's almost like a pivot, right? Or
Yeah.
like an acceleration where you're like, oh, and you go down a rabbit hole or whatever it is. I think that was definitely one of them. When I first started reading about investments in Warren Buffett, like I said, I was 17 years old. That actually was a major pivot that put me on a trajectory for a while. Right, that's what
Yeah.
made me choose the major that I chose, and then get down the career path. When I started working at the bank, I started studying for the something called a chartered financial analyst designation. I started doing all this like investment research, investment analyst, investment management oriented stuff because of that. So yeah, I think you're spot on in that regard.
Hmm.
It did start me down that path. I think prior to that, my dad was never really entrepreneurial, but his brothers were, and they were doing like typical immigrant type of businesses. Like they came, one had bought a taxi medallion. This was years ago before Uber destroyed
Hmm.
that business. The other had another one was like in like a private pizzeria, and then they migrated from there into the franchise business. Domino's Pizza, Papa John's Pizza. I actually owned a Papa John's Pizza franchise for about 5 6 years after Credit Suisse. So I
Yeah.
started getting into that. But watching them do their small businesses, run their small businesses as a young age, like even when I was, this is really young, like 8 9 10 years old, like my dad would go and visit his brothers who were running this business, and we would be sitting in the back of the business, like talking to them, and I started getting really interested in business at that time. Like I would work with them, I would fold boxes, and then I started hustling different things. Like just it sparked my entrepreneurial curiosity at a young
Yeah.
age. So I think that started me on that path. And then when I found Warren Buffett at the library that one day because of the conversation that me and the kid had, that like graduated me to like, oh wow, there's like even more interesting things you could do in the business and investment world. And this guy, like, the way I when I read his book, the way they describe Warren Buffett is he's like a young guy like sitting in his bedroom like reading 10Ks and 10Qs, like
Yeah.
annual reports of companies, and then he's making millions of dollars. I was like, that's what I want to do. It's a lot harder than I thought it was, and I went down that path, and I realized it probably is not for me. But that was really cool, and so that put me on a different trajectory. And then I think when I was in my early 30s, this is like maybe 4 or 5 years into me running the Papa John's business that I told you
Hmm.
I bought into that franchise, and I had stores in the Bronx. I was looking for something else to do, and that's when I hit upon real estate. I started going down
Yeah.
that same path. I started reading books on personal development and just kind of opening my mind to other options. And that's when I found real estate and got into real estate, and then, you know,
Yeah.
started down
So
that path.
after school, you said Credit Suisse, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what were you doing there?
I was a junior analyst, so I wasn't doing anything exciting, and that's probably why I didn't stay there that long. So
Yeah.
I got hired as like a junior analyst in the it was like an operational role.
Yeah.
I did a summer internship there, did well. They hired me for the next summer, so it was kind of like, all right, I got this gig, and I didn't have to go interview elsewhere and things like that. They pay really well for a young person coming out of college. So I was like, this is amazing. So I started there. Immediately knew it wasn't the right place for me, but I ended up spending like 5 years there anyway. But just doing like the work was boring. I was doing like operational stuff. I spent like a couple years doing change management, which is like internal consulting. And I was
Hmm.
liaising with like IT departments, and like I was in the project management department, IT departments, and like trying to implement new systems. So it's like more operational, like Six Sigma type stuff, which is cool stuff and it's important stuff, but it just wasn't what got me going.
Yeah.
So then I tried to rotate out of there, and I took a job on a trading desk, and but still doing just like support for the actual traders. And it was what's called an agency business, so it's not like we were taking positions for ourselves. We were basically brokering
Hmm.
between buyers and sellers. And that was a little bit more interesting for me, but still, like, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the driver's seat. I wanted to make investment decisions, and I didn't have a lot of luck breaking into those kind of roles.
Yeah.
Um, and I probably didn't give it enough time because I was a little bit impatient. So, like, I was like 25 years old, and I was still doing what I considered, not as exciting of a type of work. And I was interviewing here and there, and I wasn't getting the role that I wanted, which was like more front office, revenue generating, being able to make investment decisions. And so I was like, fuck this. I'm out of here. I quit, and I was on my way to becoming Warren Buffett. That in my mind, when I quit that job,
Yeah.
everybody was my family, my friends were like, "You're fucking nuts." Like I was 25 years
Yeah.
old. I was making like 100 grand a year, and this is more than 10 years ago. So it was 100 grand wasn't, now
With
you go to,
inflation.
yeah, now you go to the grocery store, you spend 100 grand every week, right, on groceries and gas. But this was when, it goes a long way. And,
Yeah.
uh, and so people thought, my family was like, this is stupid. Don't do this. And it was stupid, but it was what I wanted to do, because I wasn't passionate about the work I was doing, and it wasn't fulfilling me. So I was like, I know that this is not where I'm supposed to be. And what I did, I kind of floated. So you
Yeah.
talked about
Okay.
floating, right? So I floated for like almost a year, and I was like, I'm just gonna go be Warren Buffett Jr., right? And I was a good saver, and I had all these jobs. We talked about me having all these jobs, so I was a good saver. So I had a decent amount of money
Hmm.
saved up for a kid that's 25. And I started investing. We skipped this part, but after I learned about Warren Buffett, like by the time I was like first year in college, anytime I would hear about a company, like in a classroom or whatever, I would go, I would look it up, I would like fiddle with the financials and be like, if it looks solid enough, I would like invest. I would invest like a couple $1,000s into it, and I would just sit there. I wouldn't even look at the stock. Like I would just let it sit there because I learned that from Warren Buffett. Like
Yeah.
he says that like he says his favorite investment horizon is forever. Like he doesn't really like to sell businesses. So I was just following in his footsteps, and so I had amassed a pretty decent portfolio by the time I graduated college. I think I had like 30 grand in stocks at that time, and I had a bunch of money saved up. So by the time I was 25, 5 years later, I had worked at Credit Suisse. I had a good job. I had some more savings. I had probably like close to like 200 grand. And for a kid at 25, in that time period, I mean, this is not like when dinosaurs roamed the earth, but this is like at
Yeah.
least
I mean, that's a
probably.
lot. That's a lot of money,
Yeah,
even today.
I left Credit Suisse in 2013 or 2014, so 10 years ago, right? About 10, 11 years ago. And I was 25, 26 years old, and it made sense to me. Like I put it on a spreadsheet, and I was like, I got 200 grand. I'm gonna invest it. Warren Buffett says that if he was working with small amounts of money today, this was 10 years ago, but he probably still would apply the same ideology today. It's the same thought process today. He says he can make 50% on his money every year, 50, right? So if you have 200 grand, by the end of the year, you'll have 300 grand. So I was like, all right, maybe I'm not as good as Warren Buffett. I'll make 25% on my money. So I'll make 50 grand the first year, which is fine. I was renting an apartment. I ended that lease. I went back to live with my dad. And I was like, I'm gonna save money, and I'm gonna invest in the stock market. And I'm gonna start down this journey. About a few months into it, I realized like sitting in my bedroom, not talking to anyone, and just reading annual reports was depressing me. Like I
Yeah.
literally was not in a good mood, right? And thank God my now wife, my then girlfriend, she was there to kind of lean on and talk through these conversations because I didn't realize it then. I know it now. I was having mental health problems, right? It was like that same thing that people talk about now, like post COVID and working from home, and how it like kind of messes you up, and you got to get out and be social and do all those things. I was going through that then, and so having my wife, shout out to my wife Shine, was really pivotal in working me through a lot of those issues. And then so I was kind of floating around, to your point, and then I was at a family gathering, and one of my uncles was talking about divesting some of his Papa John's businesses. And there's a long story here, but along this time of my journey, my father, this was post Great Recession, so it's like 2012 or
11.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he had lost his job. So he was kind of like somewhere in retirement. He had a really cushy job. He was like middle manager at an insurance company, like a healthcare insurance company. So he was kind of out of work for like a year. And but he was also a great saver, not a great investor, but a great saver. And there's a difference, which I learned recently. He was looking for like what's his next step, and it was along the same line that I'm looking at what my next step was. And we didn't know this at the time, but my uncle, who has since passed away, rest in peace, but he was going through some issues. That's why he was divesting his business. Like he was going through issues with the labor department. He was going through issues with like just business not doing well, like post recession, right? And so we didn't know this at the time, but we negotiated with him. He had like 15 stores, and so we negotiated with him, and we bought two of his stores. Okay, and then he sold the rest of them to other people. And that started me down this really wild and crazy journey of being a small business owner in New York City. I got sued by the Department of Consumer Affairs literally like a year into owning that business. They came in, did a bunch of audits. They fined me like $70,000, which I then at 26 years old, I started fighting the Department of Consumer Affairs. So I remember like taking the train down to downtown Manhattan to go like meet with them like unannounced. Right, I just showed up and I was like, I need to talk to this guy. He's suing me, this guy right here. And they were like, oh, you can't just do that. And I was like, yeah, but is he here? And he was there and he came out and he spoke to me. And I think that went a long way towards getting that fine reduced because he saw that he was not suing like some huge business, right? Which is what they think when they like just drop lawsuits on small businesses that maybe are connected to big brands or whatever. And just seeing me as like a 26-year-old kid with my backpack on, and I was talking to him, and I was like, "Look, I can't afford to pay you $70,000. Like, what do you need here to get this like cleared up?" I remember that so well. That was one of the most stressful times, man. Like in business for me.
So
And then so he, yeah, go ahead.
I want to go back to that, but before we keep going, I
Yeah,
do want to ask. So you said after you left Credit Suisse, there was about a year where you were just kind of like floating around, trying to
yeah,
figure out what your next moves are. You're digging into investments and
yeah,
trying to make that happen.
yeah.
What was it like when you left a safe job? You mentioned a little bit about it. You left a safe
Mhm.
job and now you're this crazy guy who's trying to figure this out. And
Completely nuts. I was completely nuts. Not just crazy, just I had lost my marbles.
yeah. And so your friends and your family were really, adamant that that was a bad move.
Oh yeah. I mean, they supported me. My wife was my girlfriend then. She supported me 100%, right? Because she just, rose-colored glasses on. She was like, she loved me. I could do no wrong. She was like, "You're going to be ultra successful. Do whatever you want, honey." And I was like, "Thanks, babe." And my dad was like, "This is stupid, but, he knew I was kind of like a firecracker, so like he knew that arguing with me wouldn't really do much. So he was just like, I don't get it, but you do what you want. And most of my friends and family were along the same lines. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, what are you doing? Um,
Hmm.
but I just knew
So,
in my heart I had to do it.
so you really just had your girlfriend, now your wife, shine as really just like a sounding board at the time. Did you really have much else of like a support, or were there like, I don't know, were you leaning on any sort of mentors at that time, or not really?
Not really. I think that's always been kind of like a detractor out of my life is that I never really had a great sounding board of believable people. Like
Mhm.
I don't know if you know that term from Ray Dalio. Like I learned that in my early 30s after reading his book Principles. This
Yeah,
this concept of believable people, which is that you want to get advice, but you want to get advice from the right people. So if I want advice about real estate investment, I shouldn't be asking my uncles who aren't real estate investors, right? And that's what I was doing when I was in my early 20s. And I think I would be much further along if I had a group of believable people that I was talking to as opposed to uh, just just people that were around me, right? My wife, God bless her soul, she is amazing, completely supportive of me. But at that time in my 20s, eh, talking to her about stocks and real estate wouldn't have made sense because that's just not her wheelhouse.
yeah,
It wasn't when she was in her 20s. She was studying to become a nurse, and her thing was just a different. She was down a different path. So, talking to her, talking to my dad, talking to my brothers, even some of my uncles who did some investment. I remember having a conversation with one of them once I started learning about the investment scene and direct to seller marketing and being like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And he looked at me and he was like, "This is a person who had rental property, right?" He looked at me and he was like, Explain to me why someone would sell you a house for less than what it's worth. They own this house. This is their asset. Why would they give it to you for 50 cents on the dollar, dummy? And I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense, but I don't know. These guys over here seem to be making a butt ton of money doing all this. Like, shouldn't we go and explore this? And he was like, dude, you're wasting your time. And I'm glad. I mean, I did spend my 20s kind of being anchored by that kind of thought process and those people. And they're not bad people. They just didn't know what they didn't know. But everybody's got an opinion. That's the freaking problem with humans, right? They all have an opinion, even if they don't know anything about that topic. And we have to be better at discerning who's believable and who's not. And I didn't learn that till I was in my 30s. And then when I finally figured it out, I was like, you know what? If I really want to see if this investment thing makes sense, this real estate thing that I'm hearing about, I got to go find someone who's doing it and jump on board with them however I can. And that fast forwards me to 2018, where I took a gig. I took a job basically with the real estate investor on Long Island, and I learned the business by working for that person.
Yeah. Yeah. So I, I just want to go back to the concept of believable people. That's something I know I've definitely struggled with.
Yeah.
And I've tried to be more
Oh, all
conscious
of us.
about it. Yeah, I've tried to be more conscious about it because, I've noticed everyone always, like you said, everyone always has an opinion. And the problem is they always think what they're doing is the best option, typically. So you can ask someone, hey, what do you think I should do here? And typically they tend to be biased towards whatever it is that they're doing, right?
Hmm.
Maybe it's the kind of marketing they're doing in business or the kind of exit strategies they're using for real estate. So I've tried to be way more intentional about that. And the thing is, you can still take bits and pieces from people and kind of put it through your own filter, so to speak. But ultimately, no one's going to be able to give you like Layla Hermosi talks about this. She's like, the person you're really looking for is the future you, and that person doesn't exist 100% across the board. That person may be 5% of Warren Buffett, 5% of Ray Dalio, 10%. So like, and it's really about like trying to match those, and whatever it is very specifically, maybe you just find the expert on that front. And I've definitely over the past couple of years tried to be way more intentional about who I'm getting advice from, because I totally can get that. It also kind of leads you like down a path that you didn't even really want to go when you start taking advice from people. Sometimes you got to just like I'll just shut down and stop asking other people for advice, and just because a lot of times we know what the answer is. We just like want to get confirmation from someone. So personally, I've definitely had to pull back at times and just stop asking for advice from other people.
I think that's so powerful what you just said. It's like you have to there has to be like layers, right? When you're receiving information, you can't just like take it and then you have to process it and then
Yeah.
see what works for you and kind of mold it for your situation. And then yeah, like to your point, you said like you might become 5% of this guy and that guy. Like I thought I was going to be the next Warren Buffett, then I realized I'm not wired for uh, that kind of work. Like I'm more naturally wired for speaking to people. And so now that I'm in more of a sales role, which I never thought I'd be a salesperson. I always thought I was like some type of analytical, like Warren Buffett type of guy. And there is a component of that in me, but I realized like I'm more interested in getting out and communicating with people and being sociable, which is weird because I think a lot of people might consider me an introvert, but I do like socializing. It's just about the things that I like socializing about. So becoming more aware of who you are allows you to take the advice and information and stuff that comes at you from the external world and process it through your lens and through your filter. But when you're not as self-aware as I wasn't self-aware of myself in my 20s, everything that comes at you, you're just kind of taking it and running with it. And there's really not a problem with that, especially early on in life. That's like you're exploring. You're trying to figure out who you are and what you're all about. So, I could say like, hey, I blew my 20s. I should have been, I should have stacked like $100 million in my 20s, which I didn't. But that's not how life works. Like it's all a cumulative learning experience. You just have to be a learning machine, and you take things, you trial and error them. You're like, this is not really for me, and then you go and you try a different thing, and it's an iterative process that goes on and on and on. And even now, like I'm still like I'm 37 or 8. I don't even know. Depends on what year it is. Um, I'm pushing 40. Let's put it like that. And I'm still trying to figure out like my life's arc, right? I'm still like, am I gonna be direct to seller marketing on Long Island for the rest of my life and doing like 15, 20 deals, or maybe I'm gonna get to 50 deals, so like these big ballers that I hear about on Long Island. And then what? What am I gonna do then? Am I gonna start buying commercial buildings? Like, what am I gonna do? Like, am I gonna like, what am I gonna do? I have no idea. Like, so I'm still iteratively trying things and doing things. But then there also comes a time where you have to actually like home in on something for a little while, right? Like early on, like you could start tasting different things and dropping them if they don't feel good. But once certain something starts to feel good and you're like, okay, this could be something, then you have to give it enough time as well. Like you can't keep bouncing around. Like once you find something that, for the most part, it's the right thing for you, then you may have to spend 2, 3, 4, 5, a decade, figuring that thing out, right? And that's also important, and it's a delicate balance. Like you don't want to keep bouncing around forever. Um,
Mm.
you do have to dig in at some point and get
What you just touched on there. So my favorite quote of all time is "Vision without execution is hallucination." So
that's
uh,
powerful.
yeah, so what you just said there is like, yeah, the vision and everything's great and all that, but ultimately you actually have to execute long enough in a particular thing in order to see that a lot of those results come after, maybe a few years in the industry, right? So for me, it's been a constant struggle. Uh, I guess to have the discipline to not get distracted by all the shiny objects out there. And it's like, all right, I've been in real estate for about like 5 years now at this point, 4 or 5 years. Now we're actually starting to see like the results, right? Where
Right.
things are actually starting to click. Whereas as well as I do, you know you might have a someone who's 2 months into real estate and they're like it's just not working, like
Doesn't work.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe make 10,000 more phone calls, like
Yep.
so yeah, I run into that often, and now I have such an aversion to someone who's like, oh, I want to try this, and then 3 months later they abandon it, because it didn't work. It's really just it comes down to the execution of it, right?
I think that's spot on. Yeah. I mean, you have to give something enough time to figure out if it works. And that's where, I mean, all of our conversations are basically tying in here, because that's when having the mentor, having the believable people to lean on and say, hey, I've been doing this, I've been at this for 6 months and I'm not getting the results I want or I was expecting. Someone who's been there, done that. When new people come to me and say this, I wasn't expecting like not to have a deal, and it's been a year, I could say, well, it's not the business, it's not what you're doing, it's your expectations are not accurate. Where did this expectation come from? And then we could dig into that and then realize, okay, my expectations were wrong. right? And so I
Yeah.
have to adjust my expectations and then work within the parameters of the real world. Like maybe I don't have enough money to keep doing this, so I got to go get a job and make some more money and then, come back to this or whatever the case may be. I talk to new people a lot, and sometimes there's a lot of that managing expectations and also like to your point earlier, like are you executing? You've been at this for
Yeah.
a year, like what does that year actually look like? If we break down your year into inputs, like what have you actually been doing? How many calls? And if you have leads, are you following up with your leads? And then we could get into the weeds on that a lot.
Yeah.
But oftentimes I find that new people are just not doing enough and they're not patient enough to wait for the results to come in. Because when I first started in the real estate business, I tell people this a lot. I spent about, and I was doing this part time. I was still running the other business, the franchise business, when I started my own company in real estate in 2019. I started my company. I was spending about $2,500 a month on different kinds of lead generation and my softwares and everything, like everything that had to do with my business. I did that for about a year before I closed the deal. And so a year in, I had spent about 20, I don't know, 20, maybe 20 grand or something, $25,000. And I wholesaled the deal to a builder and I made $25,000 on that first deal. So I basically broke even after 1 year of running this business. And I was like, wow, all right, this shit works. Like I did this myself. Like before that, I was working for someone else on Long Island and I was closing deals for that person. So I knew it worked, but then I was like, it was about yourself, like this self belief, like, can I do it? And when I closed that first deal, I was like, oh, I can do it, but I'm still broke. Now I got to solve the money equation. And then, but I had other leads in the pipeline, and so over the next couple months, I closed like $100,000 in business. So after that one deal, and then I sold my Papa John's business, and then I've been in real estate full time
Oh,
ever
so
since.
once you got the proof of concept in I'm assuming those were assignments, right? You were assigning in the beginning.
I assigned the first deal just because it was a ripe deal for a builder. And my
Hmm.
first deal, I wasn't going to start new construction. The
Hmm.
second deal, I bought and I raised private money. I bought it. It was in Limbrook, and I wholetailed it. Put like $6,000 into it, and then I put it right back on the MLS. And then the third deal, that was a short sale I was working on. So that I was getting ready to close on. It was a I regret not freaking keeping that deal. Um, it was a two-family in Floral Park. Bought it at a freaking, oh my God, it was like a song and a dance. It was such a great deal. And I was trying to JV it with somebody.
Hmm.
And that person was like, you know what? I'll just buy you out of this deal. So I was not intending to sell that deal. I wanted to buy it, renovate it, and either sell it or refi. It was a two family, so I was thinking maybe I'll keep it as a rental. And but the person I went to go JV it with was like, I'll give you $60,000 for this deal. And at that point, in my business, that money was so precious. It was more precious than gold to me. Like I needed that cash flow to like keep running the business. So I was like, damn, 60 G's? That's not nothing, right? So I was like, all
Yeah.
right. So I'll tell you the numbers on that deal and you tell me if I made a mistake, right? Hindsight's 2020, but so there's a short sale. Short sale was approved at like 350, 310 or something like that. 10,000 was going to the seller, approved by the bank. Then we had to give cash for keys because there was tenants in the other apartment. So we ended up giving another $15,000. All this was approved by the bank. No
Hmm.
hanky panky when it comes to short sales. So we ended up paying 325 in total for that deal. This is a
Hmm.
two-family house in Floral Park. You can look it up. I still remember the freaking address. 231 Roquette. I don't know if it's Place or whatever. Boulevard, I think. 231 Roquette Boulevard in South
Hmm.
Floral Park, legal two family. So I bought it for 325. My plan was to JV, take it down, renovate it, and then either sell it or figure out what to do with it at that point. And I ended up basically, almost assigning. It was structured a little differently to make it all kosher, but I sold it to my buddy for 380, 385 or something like that. I ended up making
Hmm.
60 grand on that. He renovated that deal, put about 110 or 120 into it, and sold it for 730 something. So he
Yeah.
probably made like 200 grand on that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to look it up
The,
right now.
the thing is, like, although it might be bitter, like, in hindsight, I mean, I'm sure that money was, like, absolutely
So important.
pivotal for you.
Yeah, it was so important. Yeah, I mean, without the JV or pulling hard money or stuff like that, like I wouldn't have been able to close on that deal.
Yeah.
Um, like now I raise private money, but back then when I was first getting started, no one was going to give me $1 to go and do that deal. So it was the right thing to do at the time. I don't have regrets, but a little bit of it. It's like when I look at it, I'm like, oh man, that could have been a nice burr addition to a rental portfolio. Then, which is kind of how I think about deals now. I'm like, should I keep this? Should I rehab it myself
Hmm.
instead of just selling the deal right away? So that was a fantastic deal. It was good, great for me. It was great for the guy I sold it to. The seller was very happy because he wanted to get out of that situation. The bank got what they wanted, and now there's a beautiful renovated two-family home where there used to be a dilapidated, cockroach-infested property sitting on that block, right? So a block away from the municipality too. There was a bunch of violations on the thing, and so
Hmm.
everybody's happy.
So after you made, a few deals, you're like, screw this. I'm going into real estate. It's starting to
Full
work.
time. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that was during
so,
COVID. It was like the summer of 2020 when I closed these deals.
okay.
Um, that whole period of time is like a freaking whirlwind, like one of the craziest periods of time because I was in a restaurant business that if you know anything about like carry out delivery businesses during COVID, they exploded. They did
You killed
really
it.
well. We killed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what people don't know is all the stress that was involved with it because the day that the business exploded, like my business went up 100%, I lost 90% of my employees at the same time because, remember, the Trump administration started giving out, not only were you able to get unemployment by staying home, but then you would get an additional, I think it was like a flat $600 a week. So my delivery drivers, which I had like 10 of them, they were just like, I'm not coming to work. Like, first of all, the government's saying stay home and there's a freaking deadly pandemic going on. And I was like, are you sure you don't want to just come and do some deliveries for me? Like, and they were like, no, like, this is not going to happen. And they were making more money than they would make in a week actually working. So it didn't make sense for them to come to work. So I lost 90% of my employees. It was crazy. I crunched my hours. We were a business that was open like 17 hours a day. We went to being open like 8 hours a day because I just didn't have the staff, and I still managed to double my business and do record sales in that 8 hours. So you can imagine what
Wow.
kind of craziness was going on during that 8 hours, and I didn't even have employees. So I would come in the morning. I was putting out ads on Indeed. I would hire a bunch of people for inside the store to make pizzas and all this stuff and delivery drivers. I would train them for a couple hours. And then at like 3 or 4 p.m., we would turn on the internet. All the orders would come flooding in and we would do deliveries till about 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and then we would shut it down. And it was the craziest, wildest experience of my life. And I was like, I gotta sell this fucking business. Like, this thing is gonna kill me. And at the same time, I'm trying to do deals. My first deal, the one I made $25,000 on, I originally had a builder lined up, and I was supposed to make $80,000 on wholesaling that deal, but COVID happened, so I was negotiating with this guy in the beginning of February. Then at the end of February, early March, this is when like the shutdown like happened, or it might have been late March. The timeline's a little skewed, but the guy basically retraded me on the deal. He was like, "This is a different environment now. I can't pay that. You know, the real estate market was shut down for a couple of months." And so he dropped his price on me. I was in contract. There's a first property when I started my own business that I went into contract on. I had like $18,000 on deposit. I was like, that's it. I'm dead. Like my business, my pizza business is kicking my ass. I got no employees. I'm supposed to be doing record sales and I gotta fucking hire people every single day. Now I got 17 grand on deposit on this deal. I gotta go to the freaking homeowner and tell her that I won't be able to close on this property. And it was just like a wild freaking shit show. At the same time, my wife was working in the emergency room of Manhasset, what is it called? North Shore University Hospital, one of the hardest hit hospitals when COVID first flared up. And she's coming home and she's telling me, like, dude, I watched people like dying and they're basically running out of room in the freezers and they're just putting bodies in like what are they called, like the like frozen trucks, right? They're just, she
Holy
watched them
shit.
stacking up bodies in there. It was pretty crazy in that first couple months until they figured out how to treat this thing, right? So she's depressed, right? And I hope she doesn't mind me saying this. I don't think she will. Like it was a natural part of these like first line workers' lives at that time. They were fucking depressed, and they were coming home after seeing some gruesome shit and being like, you know, my wife would just kind of sit there. I got COVID, really bad in the first week of April. And so she's coming home watching me. She's probably wondering if I'm going to live. And she's like, oh shit. And I'm like, you know, don't come near me. This is when we were like still like really hypersensitive about, you know, what this virus could do. It was a wild time.
Yeah,
But
and you're just drowning. She's
I'm
seeing a bunch of
drowning.
dead bodies all day, and
Yeah.
you're just
It was
drowning.
and we had just gotten married that January. So it was like a really weird way to start our
You got
marriage.
married in January of 2020.
January 10th we got married.
Holy
January
shit.
January 13th, we were on a plane to Hawaii. And on the way back, I'm texting my dad. We're still in the airport, like in Japan or something. And some like some country close to Hawaii, like it was like Asian part of the world, Japan or I don't know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I'm in the airport just texting him and just being like, "Hey, we're on our way back," and he was like, "Okay, stay away from Corona." I didn't know what the hell Corona was at that time. He was talking about coronavirus. I thought he was making a joke, like, "Yo, you better not be like binge drinking out there in Hawaii." And I was like, "Haha, Dad, like that's funny." And then we came home and we started seeing in the news that there's this virus, and I don't even
Hmm.
think it had come to New York, or it was like upstate in New York at that time.
Yeah.
And then the world just like completely changed. And so yeah, it was wild. It was 2020 was wild for my wife and I.
Yeah, I'm sure after that though, like you came out a completely different beast though. Like yeah, like the fact
Animal
that you were
instincts
able
kicked
to
in.
yeah. So
Yeah,
you're running the two stores, the Papa John's. Now, what towns were those in? Where
they were
were they?
both in the Bronx. At this point in time, I only had the one store. So two stores,
Okay.
we bought two, and then it was like a fix and flip. We quickly sold one within that first year. Sorry about that. Let me go ahead. We quickly sold one in the first year when I bought them. It was like 2014.
Okay.
So we raised the sales and we bought it. And the other one we took from when we bought it, it was doing $14,000 a week in sale. We took it from 14,000 in 2014 to 24,000 a week in sales in 2017. And then I looked around. I was trying to decide if I was going to expand because to me it didn't make sense to do that business unless I had like at least 10 of them, like, you know, and then I could sit on top. I could have a supervisor. I could have managers in each store. But just having one or two stores was like a job, and you were basically managing a restaurant. And I did that for 5 years. And I was like, in 2017, I was looking around. I was like, what should I do here? Should I expand? Expanding meant I had to take on a lot of debt. Like these stores, even if they're poorly run, are going to sell for like 200, $300,000. And or I could build a store. Building out a store was going to cost like around the same, like 250, $300,000. So I started negotiating with people to see if I could buy some stores, some existing stores, and do the same thing and just build them up. But long story short, like a home office hedge fund type of investor came in and bought like 30, 40 stores at one time. And they were paying premium prices, and I was trying to buy them at cheaper prices, and it just didn't make sense for me to expand. I ended up selling my existing store to him a couple years later in 2020. And yeah, it wasn't a place where I saw myself growing and expanding to the business owner that I wanted to be, so I had to pivot. And that's when in 2018 I learned about this real estate investing stuff, how people are going direct to seller, doing marketing. I took a
From
job.
where?
Hmm?
From where?
Probably like Facebook, dude, or something.
Yeah.
Like I probably like woke up one morning, was scrolling, doom scrolling on my phone in the morning, and got an ad. I don't remember exactly who, what, but somehow I got into the whole YouTube University thing. From there, I jumped to. I was just like I was reading and watching about people who were doing this out of state, North Carolina, like Max Maxwell. There was a guy in Louisiana, I think Chris Rude. Like these are one of the earlier videos that I watched, and he was talking about putting out bandit signs, and he was going to make like $750,000 that year. And I was like, damn, this guy doesn't even look that smart, and he's in
Yeah.
Louisiana doing this shit. And I was like, all right, let me figure out if I could do that in New York, right? Because I know from running a small business in New York that New York's a different freaking animal. Like it's just the regulations are different, the rules are different. It's not the Wild West out here. So I was like, let me figure out if this is even possible out here. I went to some RIAs in Manhattan, right? So I commuted out there, did that, started to like network. I started to meet
Yeah.
people. One guy was like, "Hey, you could do some cold calling for me. I'll show you the ropes." He wasn't really showing me the ropes. He was just having me do calls, and he wasn't even giving me phone numbers. Like I was literally going online and like trying to find phone numbers for free. This was like my early experience in direct to seller marketing. And the crazy thing is that I actually spoke to real homeowners in central Brooklyn, right? Like Bed-Stuy type of neighborhoods that owned, brownstones and things like that just off of like Googling addresses and names on like True People search would pop up online. And then I reached out to the guy and I was like, can we get like more paid marketing? Because I had heard about this where you could skip trace people and whatnot, and he just wasn't into it. And I was like, you know what, if you're not going to invest in your own business, I can't really work for you and try to find you deals. So I was like, let me find something a little bit more legitimate. And that's when I found a company out in Suffolk County. The guy Billy Alvaro. A lot of people know him. He's got a pretty significant online presence. And I DM'd him on Facebook. And I was like, look,
Hmm.
I've been driving for dollars. I work out in the Bronx. I have a business out here. I have some leads. And he was like, all right, let's talk. And one thing led to another. I interviewed with them. I jumped through a bunch of hoops, and I started as their acquisitions person. And I started to see how the sausage is made. Like I started to learn what kind of marketing they were doing at that time. I don't know what they're doing now, but they were doing like a very heavy direct mail marketing, like $30,000 a month budget in direct mail. And then the leads would come into a little system, and I was like, "Yo, what is this?" And I was like, "Podio, okay, I got you." And then it was like, "What are you using to dial?" "Oh, this thing called smartphone." "All right." And I would just write these things down. And I was just learning the business, and then I would like talk to the marketing people, and I'd be like, "Well, what are you guys doing?" And I learned about lists and list stacking, and I learned about um, everything basically. And then
Yeah.
I was there for probably 6, 7, 8 months. grinding it out because the culture there was not for me, right? It was a little bit, I don't know. I won't go into that, but it wasn't a place where I saw myself staying long term. But it was a great place to like a jump off point to learn the business, realize that it can be done and it's being done actively in New York on Long Island. And then I think the aha moment for me was we put a property in contract in Elmhurst, Queens, and the owner of the company, we basically wholesaled it. So we didn't even close on that property. And we assigned the rights to that contract to another buyer and made $100,000 on it. And I was like, what just happened here? Like, it was insane to me. And I was like, all right, I got to go. Right. So I gave them my notice. I was there for less than a year, maybe like 8 months. I stayed there. I stayed on for another month. I trained their next employee, made sure they were good, we left on good terms, and I hung my own shingle, so to speak. Like a month after that, I started my own company, and I started doing my own marketing. And my goal was I got to do my $100,000 deal. And it took me a while. Like I did some big deals, but I didn't do $100,000 deal till I think 2023. I think it was last year where I did a
So
hundred.
you started in 2020 in real estate.
I started in 2019, so like the second
Okay.
half of 2019. But I wasn't full time until 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And now, obviously, I know you through real estate, and but you have a background that's not just in real estate, right? Um,
hmm
what's really next for you? Obviously, we talk about this every once in a while. What's kind of next on your radar? Is it just increasing the size of your business, doing more deals, or do you see yourself ever going to a different industry again? Or
Such a great question, man, and I don't have a great answer to that. And I think
yeah,
we talked about this before where like, you bounce around and you taste different things, but then when you find something that you really think you could like sink your teeth into, you just got to get in there and you got to do
yeah,
the work, right? And I think I'm in that phase right now where I'm just trying to do the work and I'm trying to just get better at the everyday work because I'm not good at working. That's a big thing. Self-awareness is very important. So I am not really that disciplined person that gets up 5 o'clock in the morning, does the cold plunge and the ice water with lemon, and then works out and meditates and reads 10 books, and then is like, all right, now I got to go and like buy 18 million houses today before 12 p.m. Like I'm not that kind of guy. I'm more laid back in my flow of my day. So I'm trying to create a little bit more discipline. And I'm trying to just get better at my everyday work. I have an employee. At one point I had like 6 virtual assistants working on my with my company. Right now I'm down to me and my one virtual assistant, and me and him are just trying to be lean and mean. And shout out to John, my virtual assistant. He's my one employee right now, and we're just trying to be lean and mean and crank out deals. And then I'm going to start to add on top of that business. So I think if you ask me today, what's next? It's just to incrementally improve my business, improve the number of deals, the profitability of the deals, the bottom line at the end of the year. And now I recently, and I think you know about this, I think last month or 2 months, closed my largest wholesale assignment. Not the largest profit in the business because the rehabs are always larger profits, but my largest wholesale assignment was 120,000 a couple months ago. And an interesting thing happened is that I wasn't that excited about it. When I closed my first deal for $25,000, that first one that I talked about, I was through the moon, like over the moon excited about that deal. I damn near like took a week off of doing anything in my life because I was just like, I'm the freaking man smoking cigars, shit like that. I was just like, dude, I did it. Right? This time when I closed this buck 20, it was just like business as usual. Right. So then I started reflecting on that. I'm like, I'm supposed to be celebrating my accomplishments and things like that. What is the issue? And I realized that that's not what's going to move the needle for me. Because when I did my first deal, what happened was my life changed. The trajectory of my life basically changed, and it put me on an exciting path, right? When I closed this buck 20, it was just business as usual. My life doesn't change by another $100,000 coming into my business now. So now what's going to move the needle? I start to think about that. And I think now what's going to move the needle is creating systems and processes and building a more, I don't, maybe automated's not the right word, but just building more systems and processes so that my business can live and breathe without me, typing on the keyboard or picking up the calls and doing everything, because when I'm sleeping, that means my business is sleeping. Right? I have a
Yeah.
lifestyle business right now. Like, I work these leads, I work these deals with my one assistant who's a phenomenal, and he takes on a lot with me. But the two of us are basically just running this business together. And I think the next thing for me, the next iterative step for me, is to add a couple more systems. You and I have talked about this, maybe an executive assistant to kind of take off a lot of the administrative work that gets involved, that you're involved in this business. And then after that, maybe an acquisitions person, and then start to turn up the heat on the marketing once I have the help with the acquisitions. And that's kind of like what I see as my next step. I don't know. I haven't really defined it that well, and I haven't been the type of person that defines goals that clearly. Um,
Mhm.
I just kind of do, and then see where things take me, and maybe I don't know. That's probably not a good thing, but
Yeah.
so
So
that's
you're
my next
looking
step.
at, yeah, you're looking, I mean, you said you're still in that phase where it's like, this is clicking. Like,
Right.
why would I go do something else right now? Now would be the time to throw, gasoline on the fire and, take it even
Right.
more seriously and build it out even more. Makes sense.
Yeah. Hey, listen,
Now,
I'm blessed, man. Every year in this business, I've made more money than the year before.
yeah.
I make more money than the average bear. Like, I made more money than I ever made in the professional workforce in my other business. Like, everything is clicking.
Hmm.
But I still, now I'm not that excited about income and deal size and that sort of thing, because now it's like, what is my identity right now? I'm still a deal hustler, right? I'm hustling up deals. Like, when I get off the phone with you, a digital lead came in just before I hopped on this podcast, and their phone number's invalid, right? I sent them an email, and they haven't emailed me back. So when I get off the phone with you, I'm gonna hop in my car and I'm gonna drive over and I'm gonna knock on the lady's door because she's 15 minutes away from where I live. And so I'm just constantly just hustling up new business. And that was cool in 2020 and 2021. Now it's 2024, right? So now I have to see what's the next iteration of my business and of me, right? Of Naman Coker. Like, what is that going to look like? Like, am I going to eventually run an actual business, or am I going to just keep hustling up deals? Because you can make a great living hustling up deals. And because of my life right now, I got two small kids and I want to spend a lot of time with my wife and my kids and that sort of thing. I have this lifestyle business, but eventually I think what I'm eventually going to do is start to build this out a little bit more and bring on some people. And it might happen sooner rather than later. We'll see how this year
Hmm.
goes and then figure it out from there.
So how do you go through the process though? Like you said, right now you're lean, right? And
And mean.
that's yeah, and that's powerful, right? You don't have a tremendous amount of overhead when it comes to employees or anything like that. So that's kind of a weapon in itself.
Yeah, it
Now,
is.
how do you think through hey, now I'm going to hire more people. I'm going to spend more on marketing or whatever. And now your overhead's actually more. So when you decide to, hey, I want to spend some time with my kids, I'm not really going to, I'll take half the day today or something like that. How do you think through that? Because do you think you're going to still want to do that? Because for me, my overhead has gotten to the point where it's like, kind of overwhelming, right?
Hmm.
And when I take the time off, it's like less of
Stressful.
like other. Yeah, you think like everyone's gonna be able to like take care of everything, but it's also like, all right, 1 month of us not doing well creates like even a big problem here, like, so how do you think through that thought process?
Listen, I don't have a good solution to that, right? And
Yeah.
going back to the idea of believable people, like this is probably not the right podcast for me to even pontificate on scaling and being being able to take time off because I haven't mastered that, right? When I take time off, my business is non-existent. Like if I'm on vacation, not taking calls, yeah, I mean, John's going to be following up with people, but who's going out there making offers and doing all that sort of stuff? Nobody is, right? Like it's either me or not. I'm basically a solopreneur, so I have to figure that out alongside you actually, and figure out how to do it. Because right now I have a very lean business, like high 80s, low 90% profit margin business, right? Like I don't
Which
spend
is awesome.
yeah, I don't spend that much money to produce a pretty decent income every year. But that's not going to be the long-term goal. Like I can already feel it. Like I'm kind of getting like tired of that whole hustling up deals all the time. And I want to see, if you're not growing, like what are you doing with your business? That's kind of my mentality is like, I want to start to move towards the next iteration of the business. But I give myself grace and it doesn't have to happen overnight. And I'm kind of looking to see how the P&L shakes out in 2024 because now we're in like third quarter, September right now of 2024. So I'm looking to see how this shakes out. I want to start to put a plan together for 25 pretty soon, like in by October, and that's got to involve some additional pieces to at least take a bunch of stuff off my plate so that I feel comfortable turning on the gas to go into your question, turning on the gas to increase my overhead do more generate more leads so that I can actually process them because there's the lead generation but then there's processing the leads and processing the leads is like speed to lead getting on the phone with them qualifying them and then there's a whole next set of processes around following up with these people which if you don't have a good system for that a lot of these leads are going to be wasted dollars, right? A lot of your lead gen is going to be wasted dollars if you're not processing them efficiently and with speed. Have a bunch of disposition strategies so that you're not just a one trick pony, and then following up with those leads appropriately so that you can close them when they're ready to be closed. I have to make sure that that operational system is working well before I go in and like double my marketing spend.
Yeah.
And while I treat this business like a lifestyle business, I don't feel comfortable going in and doubling my marketing spend or even incrementally increasing it a little bit because I'm busy and the leads that are coming in I'm working on processing them. So I'm at a point where I'm starting to become the bottleneck of my business. And so that's a sign that I need to do something. I need to hire, I need to either implement systems and softwares to take some of that work off my plate. Maybe I need to push a little bit more towards my virtual assistant. Maybe I need to add another virtual assistant. Maybe I need to add someone here locally to help with the business. But some way, somehow, it's gonna have to happen. And I think I'm getting to that point where it's just it is what it is. I have to call it what it is. I'm a bottleneck to my business at this point. Did that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I I would love to hop on a call with you when you have your plan ready, because I'm at that point now where I'm starting to create plans for next year. For we're in Q3, like you said. Q4, there's still some variables. We're not sure how that's going to end up for us. Um, but I know by the end of this month, early next month, I should have a pretty concrete idea of what my first couple months of next year look like and what need to happen in order for XYZ to happen. So I'm happy to hop on a call, and I think having that sounding board to be able to have those conversations with is super important. Now, I want to ask you, I mean, have you thought about, obviously we talked about it before. I mean, what, what about a coach or, a mastermind? Would you be open?
Yes, I think I probably need that. I'd like a coach that is local to my market. I've been harassing Charles Weinrab on Instagram, like, yo, when are you gonna start your coaching program? And sometimes he answers me, and sometimes he doesn't, and stuff like that. But I'd like a coach to be local, and I'd like it to be a one-on-one coach where I have direct access to that coach. I don't know if that's feasible or available to me. I mean, I have friends that are doing that are multiple steps ahead of me in the business that are local that I lean on and that I can call and discuss things with and but I don't have a more formal relationship, and I think that's okay too. So in a sense, I do have some coaches, right? I have mentorships and in friends that I've done
Mhm.
business with, I've done JVs with, that I bounce things off of. That, but the more formal relationship, which I think you're alluding to, I probably need to pull the trigger on that eventually. I mentioned this earlier in the pod, is that that's kind of been one of the issues with me, is that I, I I've had this mentality. I don't know why. But it's as an early age, like a lone wolf mentality, where I'm just like, it's just me against the world. And so I always think I could just figure things out on my own. And I'm certain that that has held me back in my progress in life. And that if I bring on the right team, not just people that are going to report to me, but people that can serve as like a mentor or a consultant in my business, that I could probably get to many, open up the next levels of whatever this business is going to look like in the future.
Yeah, like me personally, I've even been thinking about getting a coach that's not even real estate specific, just because
Interesting.
I mean, like we kind of think like, oh, real estate is so unique, but like a
Right.
lot of this if someone's an expert in other businesses, it's translatable,
It's
and they're
true.
going to be able to
Yeah.
and they're going to be able to kind of help down that path. It's like, I don't know, so a lot of
100%.
and I think, like you said earlier, and it all kind of ties back, is just finding that believable person, right?
Yeah.
And I think I don't think anyone really needs to limit themselves to how many believable people they have, especially when you're paying someone a lot of money to be specifically a coach.
Right.
You tend to take their advice and ride their decisions out. So I think that's part of the benefit. So I've been thinking about that a lot recently. Obviously, I'm in a mastermind, but that's real estate specific, and everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid of real estate. But you don't necessarily get that outside opinion of someone who's like, maybe you should go into this field because you're at a point where the business is stagnant, or maybe there's a bigger opportunity elsewhere or something like that. And that's kind of
Yeah.
a little bit of the feedback I would like.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. And I commend you on that. I mean, you're pretty pretty young dude, and you've done a lot of these different. I don't know if you've done a lot, but I know you're at least in one mastermind, and you're very open to that kind of outside feedback, and you're plugged in to networks, and I think I need to do a much better job of that. And I think there's some mental hurdles that I got to work through to be like, there is a lot of information out there that I need to plug into. I might be averse to just spending the money, to be honest with you, just being like, a lot of these masterminds are like a couple grand a month,
Yeah.
and that's a part of me too, because I'm super financially conservative,
Yeah.
and that's part of why my business is probably still a lifestyle business. Even though I make a great living, it's like I could be doing a lot more if I invest in these things that we're talking about. So I got to unlock that little piece of my brain. So I'll work
Yeah.
on that. That's a good takeaway for me during this podcast. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. For me, I just remember the first time I joined a mastermind, I was super worried about how much it was going to cost. And that was like a big leap for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized it was worth every freaking penny after year one. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, let me spend more money, get into the better group, and hopefully I'll get even more out of it. And also, part of it is like, probably like, yeah, you probably know a lot of the things you need to do, but also when you're spending a couple grand a month on a mastermind, it's like, I need to see results, and you kind of force yourself into like, hey, I need to actually see the results on, the money I'm spending here. So I think that might be part of it too, is like you're kind of forcing yourself to get the results that you think you should have, just by putting money on the line, right?
Yeah, it's a form of like self accountability, right?
Yeah.
I'm investing this amount of money. Like I gotta make sure this pays off.
Hmm.
And then also there's a bunch of people in the community that can hold you accountable and that sort of thing too. So um, yeah, I'm
So
slacking in that
Naman,
department.
before we close out here, I do want to ask you. You mentioned a couple different books, but what book would you recommend to someone who's listening to this, and why?
Mm, not a big book person, but when what was that thing that you said about Jocko Will the period of time where like something like
The Warpath.
the warpath. Interesting thing that I realized while I was talking to you about my warpaths in life
Yeah.
is there's always like a book involved that kind of catalyzes that. The one that kind of catalyzed me getting into real estate, there was two books actually. Is it all right if I mention two books?
Yeah, that works.
One was Principles by Ray
Yeah.
Dalio, and there's just like these, and it's a huge book, so I can't even remember half the shit that I read in there, but these key terms like the one we talked about a lot on this podcast, like believable people, they really stuck with me, and so. And they really changed the way I think about things. So that was a great book. It's a pretty heavy lift if you're gonna read it. So use
Yeah,
it
you can
as
do
like
the
a
audio.
textbook. Even
You
the
can do the
audio is
audio
probably
version.
gonna be like pretty heavy. So, but use it as like a reference book, right? Because there's parts you don't have to read it all like A to Z. Like you could read parts of it. I love the goal settings part of it. I love the believable people. Those are like the big things that my takeaways from there, and just the mere fact that he lived his life and started writing down principles, which are just like kind of rules for how he makes decisions and how he lives his life. That in and of
Yeah.
itself was like, oh wow, that's interesting. Like you got to be a little bit more systematic about how you live your life.
Mhm.
So that was one of them, and then the second one I read was the One Thing, I think by Gary Keller, and that was a great book. And there was like little nuggets that I took away out of that book that really, really were impactful for me. And Like there was one about how he talks about like the most successful people use emotion to their advantage, right? Their emotional energy. And up until that time, as a man, I thought you're not supposed to show emotion or be emotional. And that one little, I think it was like a paragraph in that book, like changed a lot about the way I do things. And I was like, wow, so emotion is really a good thing. So I'm not supposed to just bottle this up. This was like in 2018 when I read it. Later on that year, I proposed to my wife, and I was like, "Yo, we should get married." I'm not saying that that book alone was a catalyst, but it started me down this thought process of like, I'm not supposed to just be like this hardened dude that just doesn't feel anything. Like, I could tell my wife I love her and I want to spend the rest of my life with her. That's fine. Like, I'll still be a man after that. So there's these little tidbits in that book that I took away. And but my big takeaway about books, and like everybody asks for books, is like you could read the same book as me and get nothing out of it. I could read the same book as you and get nothing out of it. It's more about where your headspace is at a particular time, and then just reading any book could like open you up to certain thought processes, and take you down a path. So it's not specific to any book, but those are the two books that helped me when I was getting started on my real estate journey.
Hmm.
The Slight Edge was another good one that I read around that same time. But I haven't read
Hmm.
too many good ones recently. You recommended something to me that I'm actually listening to.
Buy back your time.
Buy Back Your Time. Yeah, I'm halfway through that, and that's really starting to motivate me to do all these things that we just talked about, which is like hiring an administrative assistant and starting to really work on the parts of the business that are important, and that drive the business forward and that I enjoy, as opposed to just trying to do everything and doing everything in a kind of a half-ass way and just trying to stick things together. You know,
Yeah, and
that's an
the
important
buy
part.
back your time is yeah, super relevant to the conversation we're having here. I'm actually re-listening to it right now just because I know my calendar can be improved for sure. So I'm kind of looking through it and seeing if there's anything I missed the first time around. With Principles, yeah, Principles is a classic. For me and my business, what we actually ended up doing was we created our own set of principles, and really just because it's like it's a guiding document, right? It's like
Hmm.
who do we want to allow on our team? Well,
Hmm.
we want someone who has integrity, who's disciplined, or whatever else. And then we have a few different, almost like different mantras, or like literally like the Ten Commandments or something, like whatever you want to call it. It's actually like vision without execution is hallucination. Like execution
Hmm.
is like the most important factor. Things like that, just to kind of, if we're caught with a tough decision, we can refer back to that and be like, well, it's very clear here. So I definitely would recommend, people doing that, whoever's listening, with their own business. It really just it gives you more clarity when those tough situations come up.
Hmm.
And then the one thing was a classic that's we're actually making that like a required read for like new hires, just so people don't get bogged down with doing a bunch of things that aren't really impacting the bottom line, right? Like that's
Hmm.
ultimately the goal of a hire.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mon, is there anything else you want to mention before we go? And then I want you to say where people can find you and all that as well.
No, man. I mean, I know we talked about getting into some case studies on some deals, but we're pushing up against time where we probably want to get started with some actual work during the day. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm always happy to come back, do a part two if you want to talk about some case studies and some deals and just get into the meat and potatoes of like numbers on deals and how things are on Long Island and that sort of thing. But I think, you know, a lot of this conversation centered around like mindset and your business and the process that your business has and how to run your business effectively and efficiently. And I think those are really important strategic things, like, that need to be worked on. And but if you want to do like the second a part two where we just go really deep into deals, I'm happy to do that. And
Yeah.
if people want to find me, I mean, probably the most active place that I'm at is Instagram at Naman Coker, NamonKhokhar. And I
Yeah. We're going
appreciate
to
you,
put it,
man. I'm always following you closely and looking forward to our conversations. So keep doing what you're doing.
yeah, of course. I think we might need to either do a second or even like a live or something on Instagram, do a little deep dive.
Yeah, that'd be
Whenever we
great.
talk, man, it's always a good time. I appreciate you coming on. Everyone,
Likewise.
have a good rest of your day. Hope we were able to provide enough value to you, and peace. Go get after it.